So have you ever seen the 2000 TMNT movie? I have, and I would use a lot of words to describe it, like emotionally profound, beautiful, amazing, I love it, it's great, please watch it. But the general consumer and critical reception wasn't as fucking positive for some reason. And I found a little depressing that nobody seemed to understand how absolutely brilliant the movie was. People just hate emotionally complex characters and genuinely engaging commentary on humanity and forgiveness and family, and what's wrong with it? What's wrong with you? Anyway, aside from my my utter my utter complete sadness and overwhelming anguish, agonizing pain at how little people appreciate this brilliant movie, it did get a video game tie-in, like most movies around the time. And you probably know I play a lot of licensed games because I find licensed games to be fascinating, and most of them are not nearly as bad as people make them out to be. Such is the case with the TMNT game based on the 2007 movie. Oddly enough, in this case, it's a really terrible licensed game, but it's a good game in spite of being a really terrible licensed game. What I mean by that is, the game absolutely fails to do the film justice in any meaningful way. The film is deeply emotional, and I have a lot of fondness for it, and I would recommend anyone watch it at any age. But the video game completely butchers the story. The emotional moments are watered down to the point where they're utterly meaningless, and it's just a bad time in general. It's just a bad time. It would have been better if they just decided not to include cutscenes at all, like if they just decided not to have any cutscenes or dialogue, if you could just cut those out maybe, just throw those away and replace the turtles with completely different characters, then the game would be a lot less insulting. But whatever, it's still a good game at its core, in spite of the injustice it does to its license and the film it's based on. It's a 3D platformer beat-em-up hybrid, which was incredibly common around this era of video games, around the 6th generation, yeah. This game though, even though it seems mechanically average, has a few things that distinguish it. Firstly, it has the most satisfying 3D platforming I've ever experienced. Generally, when you're making a 3D platformer, you don't want to make the character too agile or too fluid in their movements, otherwise there's not going to be any challenge available in the game. Even 3D platformers where agility is a core focus limit the character's movements intentionally so that way there's still some challenge in, actually carrying out the platforming. The TMNT video game isn't particularly interested in that. Have you seen the animated series? Where they're just, from 2003, where they're just hopping all across the rooftops like nobody gives a shit, and doing all kinds of fancy acrobatics with ease? That's basically what the TMNT movie game feels like. You're just mashing the X button and they're doing all kinds of cool flips and tricks, and none of it's particularly hard, but it looks and feels amazing. But looking and feeling amazing probably isn't enough to carry a game by itself, right? Just because the platforming feels like the best platforming I've ever experienced in a 3D platformer, that may not be enough to carry a whole game. There has to be some challenge or some depth somewhere, right? It can't just feel good. That can't just be the only thing it has going for it. And you're absolutely right about that, which is why the game decided to go the Sonic approach and add a ranking system to encourage the players to complete the levels as quickly as possible and as flawlessly as possible. Much like 3D Sonic games and TMNT the movie game, you're given a ranking system that depends on 3 factors, the first factor being how fast you go, the second one being the combat, and the third one being the rings you pick up. Well, not rings, they're coins in this case. Since the platforming is so easy, incredibly fun, and fluid, I have a great time breezing through the levels. The platforming would never be hard by itself because of how lenient and incredibly agile the characters are, but when it asks you to go fast to get that rank, it becomes a lot more difficult because you're more likely to slip up in your haste. The combat ranking depends almost solely on how many times you get hit. The less times you get hit, the better. And the coins, well, they're just placed in spots that require slightly more precise platforming than normal to reach, and they add a boost to your score. There is a second way to get coins, but we'll cover that when we come to it. The game isn't flawless though, and nothing is. Some of the camera angles are really bad for the platforming, especially when you're trying to go fast. And the game is a little too obsessed with its length. In a game about going fast, you figure, like Sonic, the levels would be 3 to 6 minutes, 7 minutes at maximum, right? But the levels in TMNT often go up to 15 or so minutes, even if you're going as fast as possible. Then there's the issue with the combat being generally dull and overly simple. A lot of people seem to have issues, like difficulties with the combat for some reason, even though it's a really simple system and it's easy to game. So yeah, it's not perfect, it's obviously incredibly insecure about being too short, the combat doesn't nearly match up to the platforming, but I still think it's a good game, if they could just remove the license. Get that shit away from my movie, separate the two, please. Anyway, I think it's worth sharing, and that's why we're going to play it, so I'll see you next time for the first video.